Kyle talked about it's not enough to gather insights, you have to inspire change. And that's actually the subject of our next presentation. So there's one company that in Green Book's research has been perceived as the most innovative company in the market research space for the last 3 years, and that's Brain Juicer. And our next speaker is the COO of Brain Juicer, Alex Batchelor. Alex?
Right. I put the timer on. I'm going to try and bob and weave. I don't seem to have a clicker. Is there a clicker over here? Someone's stolen the clicker. I'll just wave when I need the next slide. Thank you. Good morning. I think I have a confession to make in an audience as august as this, and that confession comes into two parts. All right? I'm trying to stand in the light so that you can see my beautiful, beautiful face. My family will be cringing at this point. Sight of me on any kind of video screen. But the honest truth of a clicker. The honest truth of what is happening is twofold. One, I encourage you to try and find clients like Kyle. Okay, so you've just seen Kyle on the stage. Kyle was very indulgent. I first went to speak to some of his colleagues about 4 years ago, and I think freaked them out so much he spent a week apologising for me coming. Okay? And I think you need to find clients who have that kind of bravery to deal with this. And I think one of the other things, confessions I need to make to all of you, is that I am a recovering insights-aholic. Okay? So as a former Unilever brand manager who's dealt with many of these things, I have been insighted to within an inch of my life. I have believed in insights, I have thought about insights, I have thought that insights were fundamentally the currency of what we do as an industry, and the harsh truth for me, in terms of what I believe now, is that it was all rubbish. Okay? The truth of our models of human behaviour are that they're not that linear. This nice idea that I'm going to come up with an insight, and then I'm going to craft it, turn it into a great concept, that I'm going to craft and turn it into... This seems always such a good idea, but actually what Kyle has just told you is that some kind of long, non-linear process is necessary for you to get from A to B in lots of situations, and in order to do that, you're probably going to have to make a bunch of mistakes. Yeah? And yet we all do almost anything in our power in business to try and avoid making mistakes. So just to give us a perspective on human behaviour, let's start at the beginning. Hopefully the video will now work.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again a cucumber.
It goes on a bit more, don't worry, she just gets more annoyed. The honest truth of what's happening though, is if I put two monkeys in a cage and I give them both grapes, there is no problem. I put two monkeys in a cage, I give them both cucumber, there is no problem. Yeah? If I put two monkeys in a cage side by side where they can see one another, and I give one of them grapes and one of them cucumber, you get Occupy Wall Street. Okay? And that's the reality of what's going on. And when you ask questions about this kind of behaviour, we have deeply held notions of what is fair and what is not fair. And trust me, you've already heard it. There will be some of you who think that in the other lunch, 12 or at 1, they may be getting better stuff than you. Yeah? And I'm just going to seed that thought to try and see how much revolution we can really get in the course of the next few days. So the context of what we're trying to deal with. I think the truth of my experience in marketing is that we spend far too much time focusing on trying to change attitudes and trying to measure those attitudes that we have changed. And yet what all of us have spoken about, when you look at the task for marketing, it's really about behaviour change. And like anyone who's ever drawn a 2x2 matrix, and I make no apology, there's clearly the bad one in the bottom left, the road to perdition. There's the great one in the top right, that's the holy grail. I just think that way too many people in this room, in every client company I've ever worked with, is thrilled when they've done something in the top left. I can show you all the attitude that changed. Isn't it wonderful? One day their behaviour will change too. Yeah? But the truth is that a lot of behaviour in life changes with no change in attitude. And the big opportunity for marketing is to be changing the behavior, not to be focusing on trying to change the attitude. So if we think about that in a different kind of context, that's really what marketing should focus its efforts on, is on the actual behavior that's changed. And I'll try and give you an example of that in the end. So behavior change, that's what everyone says they want in marketing, in behavior change, in all that kind of stuff, and in market research. And yet the reality is we tend to get the focus the wrong way around. Now I'll give you one analogy. This is from a great book by a guy called Jonathan Haidt. In fact, actually the same metaphor is the basis of Chip and Dan Heath's book called Switch. They also give due thanks to Jonathan for coming up with it. And he talks about the thinking of the rider and the elephant. And most of our marketing effort historically has been, how do I get the rider to pay attention? How do I persuade the rider that that's what he should do? Whereas actually, it's the elephant who makes the decision. It's the elephant who decides, and if I really want to give the motivation and moving the elephant, then one of the easiest ways of doing that is just building a simple path for it. Yeah? And I'll try and give you a few examples of how you can build a path for the elephant. You can do it very literally. This was an experiment we were allowed to do very briefly in one supermarket. You actually drew the thing on the ground. Clearly in supermarkets they're selling many competing brands of tissue, so they don't want to do this kind of stuff very much unless maybe they turn it into a kind of auction between the tissue manufacturers. But I'll give you this one as a great example. This is Rolls-Royce. There are about 100,000 people in the world who can afford a $500,000 automobile. Okay? And at car shows, Rolls-Royce sell almost no cars. Why? Because the average price of a car at a car show is somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000, and who goes to the car show to buy the $500,000 car? Okay? And of these 100,000 people in the world, where Rolls-Royce have started to be startlingly successful at selling their cars is plane and boat shows. Okay? And I'll try and explain very quickly why. What happens at a plane show is that the billionaire who doesn't buy the $30 million Gulfstream jet buys himself a $500,000 car on the way home as a reward for having been frugal with his money. Okay? Now you have similar purchasing behaviors that you also do, you just probably have less zeros on the end of that decision. And that's the context of what's going on. If you think about framing and anchoring, the reality of it here is when you're the most expensive thing in the room, you don't always sell the most. But when suddenly it seems like really good value, because heck, it was only $500,000 instead of the $10 million boat or the $30 million plane, then suddenly this seems like a really smart thing to do, and it's kind of treat for being sensible. The same is also true if we pick an example. So this was taxi fares in New York. Pre-2007 was roughly 10%. After 2007, jumped to 22%. What changed? Everyone who went to New York, did they suddenly get more generous? Well, the cabbies suddenly much more friendly, and everyone thought that they deserved to be rewarded for their kindness and general good humour in every situation. You can clearly look from the stunned face of the audience that you can't imagine I'm talking about New York cabbies. No, the reality was the decision was framed really easy. The first time you could pay the credit card in the cab, and suddenly they made it easy for you. 20%, 25%, 30% of the choices, and it was easier to hit the buttons than to do the maths. Yeah? So instead of everyone suddenly getting more generous, the bunch of them were picking the lowest number, because 20% still seemed pretty generous, but there were a few of us who liked to think that we're not that mean, that we're going to choose the lowest one, and we were choosing the one in the middle. I don't know how much evidence there is of how anybody ever hit the 30% one, but hell, it may have been gorgeous. So which one of these is worth more? And again, if we start thinking about human behavior and human decision making, I am not going to embarrass any of you by asking you the maths. Okay? But the harsh truth is that the one on the right is a less good deal, but it includes two critical words that seem to work like catnip on the human psyche: extra and free. Yeah? And all logic at this point goes out the window, and we fail to do anything sensible in the face of that. And this is a very good example. It's an academic study done on some soap, and they had 35% off and 50% extra free. For the smart ones, you will have realized that's roughly the same in mathematical terms. And even though they're roughly the same in mathematical terms, the truth is that 75% of people choose this one. Yeah? And that's because 50 is a bigger number than 35. It's not because anyone's doing the maths. Yeah? And that's the context of how most decisions are driven. Yeah? So the next time you're in a discussion about sales promotion deals, the reality is don't work it out mathematically because your customers sure as hell aren't. Yeah? Even the smart ones, even your buyers. That's another good example. So this was one about paying your taxes. So they send you a letter, paying court fines. They send you a letter to complain. About 5% of people pay in response to the first letter. You usually have to get the heavy red one before you dip your hand in your pocket again. They improved it by sending you a text message. So why don't you do more of these things? And they made it even better by sending you a text message that actually had your name in it. Yeah? It's very simple, some of these things. Do I need to understand perfectly how it works? No, I just need to make it work. But let's keep going. This was a good example, a case study in the UK, very traditional. This is a charity sponsored half by the alcohol industry and half by the government. And what they wanted to do was switch people to drink lower alcohol beer and lower alcohol wine. Okay? And like everyone, they did very smart things. They went out and found agencies. They tested lots of communications, and this is where we got to. So this is a supermarket aisle in the UK. They had this very nice campaign to persuade you that you couldn't actually tell the difference between a lower alcohol beer and a full alcohol beer, and a lower alcohol wine and a higher alcohol wine. So they had all these nice kind of like models up, and like everyone, we were skeptical, as is often the case, but the client requested that this was how we did it. So like everyone else, we designed a proper kind of survey. We did all the usual things, exit surveys, sales data, we did a company shop to try and understand all of that. And again, we did a pre, post, and during wave, and what it showed was all the things the client really wanted to happen at this point. They're terribly exciting. Yeah? The idea that this is worse quality has gone down. The idea that we feel awkward about it has gone down dramatically. The idea that it's better for you, the lower strength one has gone up. All those classic intermediate measures. At this point, the client is pretty happy in the presentation. The harsh reality is, what was the impact on actual behaviour? And I'm afraid you're guessing, zero. A big fat zero. There wasn't a single milliliter less of alcohol consumed by those people, even though their attitudes about alcohol had clearly changed quite significantly as a result of some very effective advertising. Yeah? And that communication is part of the task. Yeah? So what did we discuss? And I hope at some point to be allowed back, maybe to give you the example. But what actually could you do? We reframed it as low tax. Instead of talking about low alcohol, which everyone kind of thinks is the purpose why they're buying it in the first place, what if you reframed it as low tax? And this test is currently going on, and I hope to be able to give you the results, but trust me, my instincts are telling me that it's been much more successful in reframing that idea by making you want less of something you don't like. Low taxes, the country of low taxation. So if we're trying to explain humanity, rather than trying to understand all these different dials, widgets, levers, all the conscious kind of like thought, it's really about emotion. That's what we're saying. We ultimately feel moving people in some meaningful sense, making them interested, making them laugh, making them smile, making them feel something is ultimately what you're trying to do. And in order to make that work, we've made a kind of like model. Now, if we're asking, why is the research industry maybe not changing? Why is the client marketing industry maybe not changing? Then sometimes it's a good way to look at it through the lenses of these models. One, environmental. Yeah, I bet all of you will know, we certainly do, that if you're not on the roster, if it's not easy to select, if the purchase order isn't automatic or something, if you're outside the standard process in any large company buying research, it's a disaster. Yeah? People have to really, really want to buy you in order to do so. Yeah? And you're grateful for those few times, like Carl, right at the beginning, who do. It's also social. You come to events like this, you all talk to one another. You go to TMRE, you go to big marketing industry events, and you suddenly go, oh, them, they seem interesting, talk to them. Yeah? It's that kind of interaction that matters. And ultimately, you also have some strongly held beliefs about what you really believe. What really drives kind of human behaviour. And some of those beliefs are very strong, very deep-seated, and nothing I can do up here is likely to change them, whether it's John dropping his pants or throwing you dog turds. These things don't actually dramatically change. We might make you feel something which we hope would lead to some kind of behaviour change, but it's pretty hard. So in that task of trying to turn human understanding into business advantage, what are we really kind of left with? Try and summarise very quickly in English. We aren't intelligent, we don't make rational decisions, and yet I still see a lot of marketing plans and discussions that treat us as though we do. Why? Why are we doing this? Why? And I think largely it's because it makes us feel good. We like to post-rationalise about our own behaviour. We like to post-rationalise about our colleagues' behaviour, and that leads us to making some of those choices. We're also very influenced by other people, and therefore that's what often will happen, is that at the moment, because everyone's still doing the big tracker or the 40-minute survey, you'll still keep doing it while there's enough of you who still think it's a good idea. But at what point do you get kind of called out on it? And I'd be intrigued to know if in 3 years, 5 years on an IIeX stage, anyone's even talking about survey length. But I'm reassured that my first MRS conference in the UK in 1990, when I was a junior brand manager at Unilever, I seem to remember that survey length was one of the key topics of that conversation, and that's coming up for 25 years ago. We're often better at understanding and predicting behaviours of others than we are ourselves. In fact, we've had great success talking to some of our clients about why other clients don't do some of the dramatic, innovative, interesting things that they say they do. And that's often been much more profound than us asking those clients directly about their behaviour. Because I think in those environments, people are a bit more honest sometimes about others. Memories are pretty bad. I'll give you an embarrassing one from my own experience. Once, when I was still actually on my way to Ranges, but hadn't joined yet, and was the ex-marketing director of CMO of TomTom, and I went to a big meeting of CMOs, still vaguely with a kind of CMO hat as I was kind of like leaving, and it was one of those weird ones where in a room of 30 people, 20 of them told me that they worked already with brain juice. And I was really excited about this. It was only when I got back to brain juice and looked at the thing, I found out that 14 of them were lying. 6 of them were actually working with us, and I could find evidence that they paid us for projects. But I don't know where the other ones thought that they were working with us, but they said, sure as hell may have been working with us, but they weren't paying for us for anything. So it was an interesting perspective. And I think there's also a context here that's going on in the industry, which is that actually context matters more than anything else in those decisions. And I was unfortunately in Chile, where they just had an earthquake, when I tried to use this example. So it's an example of how context can be really bad. But the truth is that if my house burns down in a fire, but I'm the only person affected, I feel rightly aggrieved and very unlucky. But if my entire village is destroyed in an earthquake and I survive, I actually feel pretty damn lucky about my situation. And that context is true for all of us. And you're the person who creates that context sometimes. And as a father of 4 teenage children, I can promise you it's quite hard to reframe. Emotion drives our behaviour, and that's really it. Now, what does it mean for behaviour changing market research? I'm just going to be very honest with you as we finish my last kind of like 10 or 15 seconds. People change slowly. And the people who are in those positions are very good at defending their position, and we're very good at post-rationalising the choices we've made, and we maintain them. And that is why it's hard to change in an industry. And I think that's really one of the questions you ask people like us when we come to events like this. Is this part of making a better path for the elephant? Yeah, that's kind of the context maybe of what we're trying to do. And is that where the Grit Innovation Report or any of those things really kind of like drive us? So that's really it, what I wanted to remind you. This is where marketing focuses its effort, but there is a big box of wasted effort there. And what we really should be doing is focusing on the bottom line. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.